Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Friday appointed one of Nigeria's biggest banking executives, Jim Ovia, the founder of Zenith Bank, to act as chairman of the Nigerian Education Loan Fund, ostensibly to provide much-needed direction to the implementation of the student loan initiative of his administration. This appointment is already receiving commendations from across the country, with many saying that Mr. Ovia's deep reservoir of experience in financial management is just what is needed at this time for such an initiative. We're now being joined by Dr. Sam Amadi for an overview. Good morning, Dr. Sam. How are you this morning?
Good morning, thank you.
Perfect.
Good morning.
Well, I'd like to begin.
I'm good.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. Well, I'd like to begin by asking you what your thoughts are on Jim Ovia's recent appointment. We know that the president believes that Mr. Ovia will bring his immense wealth of experience to ensure that, the students in Nigeria don't lack the funds that they need. Well, as commendations are flowing, there's been a lot of talk about the imminent politicization of the fund. Now, how can this be avoided to ensure that the loan gets to the qualified Nigerian students?
Well, first, I think by every measure, Chief Jim Ovia is has the right profile that fits that appointment. This is the chairman of the board. And people always forget that the board's work is usually to provide strategic direction, to deal with external engagement, to help build up firewall around institutions that they are members of the board, firewalls against bureaucratic fights. Oftentimes, public institutions have to engage with stakeholders, with the National Assembly, with other bureaucrats in government, issues around funding, internal fight, and so on and so forth. So you need, as chair and the members of the board, persons who have the pedigree, the profile, but more important, people who have strategic idea about how to move from strategy to operations and to tactical engagement. And I think Chief Jim Ovia checks all of those boxes. Of course, a financial guru himself, managing a financial institution, this is a fund to basically dealing with loans and recovery, basically determining entitlement to receive. Also, going to focus on how do we ensure that this fund is adequately funded. Of course, the law has provided a variety of funding options. One of them include budgetary, some of them are donations, of course, 1% from IRS income taxes they generate. But you would expect the board will lead in keeping this fund solvent all the time. I mean, through multiple corporate philanthropic support. So nobody better fits that, maybe a couple of persons in this country, than Jim Ovia. So I think that was a very right decision made by the president, because there is already a management team. So he comes here with strategic direction, keeps those guys focused on the objective of the fund, and ensure that the management and the fund itself is protected from external aggression and bureaucratic infighting. So clearly a good choice. Now back to the issue. I think on the issue of politicization, the signal for whether a social project will be politicized is actually rests on the president and the oversight institutions. First, definition. The law, thankfully, has been amended. The old one was a terrible law, but this new one at least passes average, what is required. But the law does not fully stipulate criteria. I mean, the basic criteria, Nigerian citizen, schooling in a Nigerian approved university, federal, state, polytechnic, and all that, are basic. Now, how do you walk down a procedure that will ensure that it's a merit-based process, whether in terms of academic performance, whether in terms of need-based? And again, I think it was not wise that the new amendment seemed to have removed the income threshold. This fund should be defined to target either of two things or both. One, Nigerians who are exceptionally talented but don't have access to education, number one, or broadly, poor Nigerians. It shouldn't be a fund because funding is a challenge for loan scheme. Do you have to have enough fund to deal with all the applications? So you're going to see, with the removal of this income-based threshold, you're going to see an avalanche of applications. But there are those who probably don't need this funding because of their income situation. So there must be a clear, defined, transparent, and accountable process of determining those who get to, receive this entitlement or receive this loan. And I think that's the first point of floundering. It's a mine that the Jim Ovia would lead the board and the management to escape. And going by the way Nigerian politics, the Nigerian public sector has become an opportunity for rent seeking, often captured by the powerful Nigerians. So you won't be out of place that this fund might also, be bedeviled by the same problem of political patronage. I mean, and then becoming a part of political campaign for some persons. And that's why you need discipline. And I think somebody like Jim Ovia, who is not that overtly political, and who has a reputation to protect, and who has experience of managing a resource in a manner that achieves strategic objective, could be the right person to push back against the political pressure. But it doesn't depend on Jim Ovia's charisma or persona. It depends on how he leads the management to develop transparent, intelligible criteria that are also accountable. So we're able to know why A got a fund and not B. If you look at the history of loans, of student loan across the world, there has been fluctuations. There have been instances where some countries refuse to do a loan scheme because of the consideration of funding. And then, like England and Netherlands, others come back, Australia, they come back to institute these loan schemes to open up access. So there is a problem that if it's too big, it becomes bankrupt because it can't pay for everybody, including those who can pay. If it's too narrow, it doesn't achieve the strategic objective of broadening access to higher education. And there's some research that show that access to higher education contributes a lot to economic growth. The time lag may be there. For example, a $1 spent on higher education yields about $10 to $15 in terms of economic growth, especially for countries like Africa with low stock of human capital. So this is a great opportunity, but it all depends on the strategy, the implementation process, and the degree of discipline, organizational discipline, and clarity, and accountability, and how the president himself signals that this is not another job for the boys. This is not a honeypot for political associate. And I want to say that we should go back to define entitlement very strict. I don't think we should be funding, at the level of our economic crisis, funding persons who can actually fund themselves to university education. I think probably that's one of the mistakes. There should be an income threshold established through verifiable means testing before we give any person this loan, because we don't have all the money and we need to expand access to higher education. And then finally, I think on this point, we need to also think around what's the national development objective we want to tie it to. I mean, access to university education is good, but it should be tied to a certain developmental agenda. Maybe you prioritize certain skill sets that have greater impact at this stage of our development to national economic growth. I think we need to have those prioritization as part of the framework for very transparent and effective administration of the fund.
All right, Dr. Amadi, thanks for setting the tone for the conversation. Precisely, what do you think the expectations should be for Mr. Jim Ovia as the chair of the board, and for the board, in its entirety? There is a secretary that will run the day-to-day affairs of Telfon. CBN governor is also in the loop somewhere there. What do you think should be the expectations of students on the one hand, together with their parents, and the generality of Nigerians? Then secondly, you mentioned the aspect of raising funds, including donations, in order to guarantee access. But a lot of people have been talking about the propriety of channeling into loans to people who ordinarily cannot afford it, funds that you got via donation. And so people are saying that why can't you just raise money via donation and put it in scholarship board? Won't telephone basically affect the whole idea of bursaries and scholarships that the federal government also ought to be considering alongside, these loans for students? Those are what, that's part of what people are talking about.
I think those are very serious concerns, and I think it's an important question. Let me start with the last question. First is, I would ask, if I was advising government, I would say, what's the need you want to solve with a loan scheme? So, a scholarship, bursary, they should all tie to strategic objectives. So most often scholarships are merit-based, and it's a way of stimulating competition, excellence, and driving up, for example, excellence in some sectors. So I think government should continue to focus on scholarship. There are also grants at the point of helping universities provide more quality services to students. So this should not, crowd out efforts by universities through the alumni, through other structures, to raise funding, to support research, to support scholarship, and improve facility for excellent teaching. So previously, we've worked together with some people to develop what we call campaigns, financial campaigns for universities. I mean, you can't depend on government, you can't depend on, maybe a few philanthropists. There should be a need to broaden access to capital for universities, especially as we're going into the world that's going to be more competitive in terms of technology, AI intelligence, high-end social science research. You need funding, you need capacity. So I would say that those streams should run. But again, the idea about a loan scheme is actually to provide financing that people ought to pay back. So if you're going to get money from the public, especially, it will be like the public is funding government. So I see that point. Maybe that should go into a scholarship scheme, free grants. But if students are going to repay back these loans without interest, then government crowdsourcing from the people and receiving repayment would mean that government is funding itself through charity, through philanthropy. So that's a moral issue to deal with, and I concede. But what I would like to say is, now back to the issue of expectation. I think that the first expectation, and the prime one, is that we want to see very efficient and trustworthy management of the fund. I mean, we've got several funds, whether at the level of humanitarian ministry, at the level of palliatives, that basically nobody can account for. Basically, EFCC are after some of the fund managers. This is a fund that would, with Jim Ovia's reputation and other people are going to be in that board. We expect, first expectation and the prime is that there will be effective stewardship and accountability of every fund. The second issue, I mean, the minister has said about 60 billion of 2024 budget is targeted, and there could be more. So that's the first. The second is expectation that the administration of this fund will be not just transparent, but fair, meaning that if it's going to be on first come, first serve, it's going to be, since they have removed the threshold of 500,000 per annum, which probably was problematic, that they must find a way to tell us how people access this fund. Again, we want to see a fund that the procedure for application, the process is, they're all transparent and simple to navigate. So this should not be a fund that you need high-tech skills or high-tech equipment to process the form. The system is down. You need to be in very hot spots to access it. There must be a way in which this fund makes it easy for those Nigerians who are not digitally, exposed, or who are in far removed rural areas of Nigeria, but who are students, to access the fund. So publicity, simplicity, no complexity in the management of it. Another expectation is that we will expect that some of the managers of this fund, the management team, the board members, should have a corporate exclusion. I mean, they come out upfront to say they are members of their households and immediate family or distant family will not have to access this fund, so that they don't be in a position of conflict of interest and they insulate themselves from any possible, unfair and immoral transactions into the fund. So we want to see a higher degree of code of conduct entirely imposed by themselves publicly, so that there will be some kind of watchdog. We watch them. We see their commitments. We measure it with performance. At the end of the day, what Nigerians expect that this fund also will be solvent for a long time. Experience across the world is that oftentimes, and even Nigeria, we create these interventions, and in a few years, they are basically bankrupt. They're not working. There are no funds, no replenishment. And so there must be, with somebody like Ovia and others, we expect that sustainability will be a key aspect of this fund. Let's just put a caveat. A loan scheme to universities or university students does not cure the problem of low quality education, lack of functionality, no deep research. So this is just access. It gives people money to use. And we hope that the requirement that employers post-graduation would report back to the fund about the income of these beneficiaries will be something that will be fully monitored. There are two models here. Some people use time-based model, which allows you 2 years, 3 years, and then you pay. But some people use income contingent model. And the first act focus on time-based. The second one focus on income contingent, which is better. So it means that we don't start repaying this money until you have an income. And your repayment rate increases as your income increases. But that requires good data management, that the fund is able to keep tab on the economic progress of their beneficiaries, so that you have, the advantage is that if you use income contingent, you don't put too much burden on the graduates who have no job or whose income is low, and therefore that discourages application. Secondly, you have a lower rate of default because people are paying as their income grows, and it helps the fund to remain solvent over time. So I think that they have got some of the fundamentals right. What then it depends now is on delivery. They need to have good data system management. They need to have integrity of process. They need to have fair and accountable see-through procedure so that the Nigerian people continue to have faith in that fund and applicants continue to feel that there's a fair process of determining beneficiaries. I think those are the major expectations we want to see in the management of this fund, especially with somebody like Chief Ovia, who has built a reputation, who has managed institutions that are still profitable today and doing very well. And we expect that he will bring that level of entrepreneurship, that level of strategic thinking, and that level of clear, accountable management to the fund.
Thank you, Dr. Amadi. Your analysis is always spot on. And I'm going through that statement from the presidential spokesman, which was emphasizing Ovia's wealth of experience and, of course, his professional stature as qualifications for the role. But I wonder how you would evaluate the role of public-private partnerships, such as this appointment, in addressing socioeconomic challenges like access to education. What are there, in your opinion, are there potential benefits or drawbacks of integrating private sector expertise into government-led initiatives? Is this the way to go, or is this something that should be monitored very closely?
I think both ways. There's so much advantage in having private sector participate in governance. Today, globally, there's a disruption. We have moved from government to governance. Government represents hierarchy, ruleness. Governance represents network, objectives. So in the era of governance, private, public, the barriers are kind of, erased. We have transgressed that strict barrier between public and private. And what keeps the wagon of PPP moving is the quality of governance. And governance is about rules, structures, not hierarchy. So you can have private actors play in public sector service delivery. And that's the idea of an entrepreneurial state that many have argued for, including scholars like Mariama Mazzucato at the University of London. And the reason is simple, that a developmental state like ours should be entrepreneurial. It should focus on how do you use your resources in a much more efficient, profitable manner to achieve clearly defined development agenda. The government can still be focused on social services, but deliver them with expertise, with entrepreneurship that makes them maximize resource input, output is maximized. So when you have the assumption is that private sector persons who have been groomed under the discipline of hard budget line are able to think around how to deliver these social objectives, but in a manner that best optimizes scarce resources. But there's a danger here. The danger is that the public and private have sometimes divergent visions and bottom line. For a Jim Ovia, it's all about the money. But for a public manager, it could be all about social impact. So you need to have a strong public sector, define objective clearly, define monitoring schemes clearly, and use the expertise of private sector people to efficiently deliver on social objective. Again, you must be careful that private sector's bottom line is self-interested. So you need to be smart to know when to use them. The private sector should not set the agenda for the nation. The public managers should be smart enough to set the agenda and clever enough to leverage on the expertise of the private sector where it is needed. The second issue is around accountability framework. The private sector accountability framework is based on results. Shareholders are better off, they're happy. But there's the public sector accountability framework, freedom of information, transparency, fairness, equity, equality, these things are not strongly emphasized in private sector. So you need to be able to use them, but with a caveat that you're going to insist on public sector values, equitability, equality, transparency, freedom of information, accountability to electors, to citizens. So as long as you control these variables and you remain on top of PPP, then you're going to succeed. China, they teach us example how to use it. All the Asian countries did that. Korea did that by enabling entrepreneurs, giving them subsidy to drive export-oriented production, whereas in our own country, we give them subsidy, but we don't maintain discipline around R&D, cost, profitability, and export. So I'm a strong believer in a developmental state, which means that the public sector must have the capability to define direction, to develop tools of control, and able to purchase from the private sector services and competencies that can help them achieve that goal. Yes, PPP, but the first P, public, must be stronger, must supervise, and must manage and use the other P, private, to achieve strategic developmental goals.
Thank you, sir. So I want to ask about something you said earlier, speaking about that loan program will not ensure that the quality of education would improve. But do you believe that if our universities get better access to funds, that perhaps we would see the standard of education improving in the long term? Or do you think that the federal government needs to do more to ensure that our educational outcomes improve in the country?
Well, access to education doesn't necessarily improve quality. I mean, in many cases, it might actually drop quality if the managers of the institutions themselves are not, expanding facilities to cope with. Take, for example, class size. I mean, if you look at the usual U.S. news report on university rating, sometimes Yale Law School beats Harvard Law School because Yale has smaller class sizes. So assuming we open up more access and more Nigerians get into the university system and we're not improving facilities, classroom size, ratio of teacher to students, you're not improving libraries, access to reading materials, you are actually going to have, simple economics. At a point, you start having diminishing returns on quality. But the argument of economists is that with more people getting university education, even if it is a little bit degraded, they are acquiring more tools, more skills to better manage technology, which is the driver of innovation. So the stock of skills in the long run improves the economy, but it might not improve in the quantity you want. So the argument here is, while we broaden access to university, we need to also strengthen the management of the universities in the sense that you are providing curriculum redefinition to meet with contemporary needs. You are also improving facilities. You are getting more teachers qualified to be there. You are also ultimately helping with the quality of scholarship and research, especially research. You see, the investment return on primary education is higher for developing countries. Secondary education is higher, both for private persons, private income, and social good. But at university level, it's less than secondary primary. That's why you see focus on basic education to be free. Everybody should have it because it gives you more return. But if you're looking at moving from a development economy to a developed economy, and maybe to an innovation economy, then the focus gets back to the university education, where you are going to be focusing on competencies and skills, not basic read and write, which helps with transition from unemployment to employment, which helps with income for private person. But you are dealing with high-end competencies that will help you move from a labor-based economy to a more capital-based economy that will make you have the kind of skill sets that you need. So at that level, not just access in terms of number, but also quality. And so I think government can do both. They can invest in broadening access through this loan, at the same time optimize the quality of education through research grant, innovation, and competitiveness. For example, why should we have universities that seem to receive funding without clear deliverables? We should be instituting competition among the universities. Competition in terms of what is the niche market for this university. Some universities could be good in biotechnology, some could be good in agrotech, some could be excellence centers for natural sciences. And then you use grant to support the development of the research capability for those universities. So I think it's now time for us to tag any funding to a university to certain deliverables. We want to see improvement in the quality of research output, quality of graduates, quality of also their non-graduate products in terms of research, in terms of supporting the development of enterprise in the country, in terms of helping to build Nigeria's digital economy we're talking about. The digital economy we're not going to come from, our sons come from Stanford, coming from Caltech and building startup. It's going to come from Nigeria creating something that's close to those universities abroad so that the graduates who will form the backbone of this technological transformation are homebred, and you can't get that until you have some average improvement in the quality of university education. Think about China. Today, Chinese universities are now very competitive. They are moving up in the rating. They're not yet top tier, compete with the Harvard and Cambridge and Oxford and other, but they're getting there. Look at Singapore. The National University of Singapore is moving in the ranking. Look at Korea. So if you look at the Asia, you see that quality of university education, especially technical universities, somehow align with improvement in GDP and economic growth. Because at that point, India is an example. The Indian Technology Institute, they are helping to create local capabilities, competencies, to get the ASOS job done, and therefore play into the market where the top technology countries have evacuated. They have exited that low-level tech market, and India and others are moving in, Taiwan, to occupy that space. So I think we can do both, broaden access and deepen quality of education.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi. Of course, we always appreciate your analysis and time here on The Morning Show.